Hey, welcome back to the Horsepower Monster. This may be a little bit different than my usual builds. Instead of a full-on engine build, we're covering more of a car here too. If you're any kind of a car guy or gal for any length of time, you've probably heard of the AMBR, or America's Most Beautiful Roadster Award. It's one of the most prestigious in the car building community, and it's given out every year at the Grand National Roadster Show in California. Now, the two main rules for winning the America's Most Beautiful Roadster are: one, it's got to be a roadster, and two, the car cannot have been seen anywhere else before previously. So it's got to be debuted at the Grand National Roadster Show. So all the way back in 2019, Keith Dorton, now he's an engine builder we've done a ton of videos with and is a good friend of mine, called and said, hey, we're building the engine that's going to go in a car that's going to compete for America's Most Beautiful Roadster. Would you like to shoot it? So I knew I was going to have to sit on it for a little bit. And of course I did want to shoot it. But I had no idea that the car build was going to take another 2.5 years. Finally, it's ready and I can show it to you because the car, a 1934 Chevrolet Roadster, actually won America's Most Beautiful Roadster and then turned around a couple months later and just now has won the Good Guys Street Rod of the Year award. So that's two of the most prestigious honors for this hobby anywhere. I really am happy to be able to show this to you, and I hope you enjoy this video. We're covering the engine and the car and a whole lot of the behind the scenes details. Enjoy. Because so many custom one-off parts were being created for this engine, the build went together over several months. So I wasn't around to capture all of it, but I'm pretty sure you'll get enough of the idea to give you a solid understanding of the build. The car this LS will be going into is a 1934 Chevrolet Roadster, which is incredibly rare. Chevrolet only made something like 1,800 Roadsters in the US at all. And the look of the engine is inspired by the old Rolls-Royce Merlin V12s from World War II. That's the engine that not only appeared in a lot of different British aircraft, but it also made the P-51 Mustang the best fighter plane in the sky at the time. Heck, the Merlin even appeared in some tanks, and it was so important to the war effort, it's been dubbed the engine that won World War II. Anyhow, I can show you the result of the Merlin inspiration once the engine comes together. At this point, the short block is complete. There's nothing too exotic about this engine so far. This is an LS7 build, and the aluminum block is an LS Next unit from Dart. The cylinder bores remain the stock diameter of 4 inches 125 thousandths, but the stroke has been lengthened 1/8 of an inch to 4 inches 125 thousandths, making total displacement 441 cubic inches. The crank is a forging from Callie's from their high-performance Compstar line, while the connecting rods are from Monar, and the flat-top pistons are from Molly. At this point, you can see that there's a cast iron oil pan in place, but that's actually going to change later in the project. As you will see, there's a lot which is still in flux and subject to change at this point. Jeff Dorton test fit the cylinder heads so he can also do a mock-up of the latest intake design. The heads are LS3 castings which have been highly worked over. Notice how all the exterior surfaces have been smoothed. Now I think this looks pretty cool just like it is, but believe me, this is only the beginning. The intake manifold is the real crown jewel of this build. It looks pretty impressive here, but just wait, it only gets better. Believe it or not, this is a one-of-a-kind casting that's been made specifically for this engine and this car build. There is none other exactly like it. The car, which has been named Lucille, is actually a team project between the owner, Jeff Breault, the primary car builder, Devlin Rod and Customs out of Wichita, Kansas, engine builder Automotive Specialist in Concord, North Carolina, and Johnson's Hot Rod Shop in Gadsden, Alabama. Johnson's worked with Automotive Specialists to develop the many one-off parts for the engine. All of these guys are not only world-class craftsmen in their own right, but they're also just great people to work with. And I'm grateful to every single one of them for allowing me to be a part of this and also providing these photos, which I'm going to be sharing. Anyhow, the intake went through many iterations, and to aid in the process, Johnson's Hot Rod Shop would 3D print intake designs. Then Devlin would test fit them in the chassis to make sure it fit and also be visually appealing, and then ship them up to Concord for the Dortons to smoke it over and ensure that it would work properly and make power. Once everyone was happy with the design, this casting was made. And I know you want to see more of it, but just give me a minute. We'll get back to it. But first, we've got to finish the long block and valve train. Johnson's was developing a front accessory belt drive system that'll look properly old school, but at this point it wasn't ready yet. So, for simplicity's sake, Keith Dorton installed this Mazier electric water pump for the dyno testing. But just be aware, like the oil pan, it won't stay there. The valve train uses stainless valves with low mass beehive valve springs from PSI. They have an installed height of 1 inch 800 thousandths and have 130 pounds of pressure on the seat. With 1.7 to 1 ratio rocker arms, the valve lift will be 624 thousandths of an inch. And the cam is a hydraulic roller from Comp Cams. It's been ground with 240 degrees of duration for the intakes at 50 thousandths tappet lift and 256 degrees for the exhaust. The lobe separation angle is 114 degrees with a 108 center line. And the compression ratio will be a pretty healthy 11 to 1. The push rods are 5/16 of an inch in diameter and 8 inches 150 thousandths long for both the intakes and the exhaust. And as I've previously mentioned, the rockers, which by the way are from Comp Cams, have a 1.7 to 1 ratio. Check out the cool machine work around the exhaust ports, adding just a little detail work. Now it may not be noticed by many people, but this just helps set this engine apart. Also, there's no head gasket you can see here, but there's definitely one in place. They actually trimmed the multi-layer steel head gasket back so that nothing extends beyond the cylinder head, making it practically invisible. From this shot and this lower angle, you can kind of see between the deck and the head if you look closely. Now that we have the valve train in place, we can get back to this super trick intake. The idea was to have all the tunability of modern EFI while keeping all the ugly stuff out of sight. So Johnson's built the intake with a hidden compartment so all the injectors, wiring, and everything else can be hidden underneath and accessed by this panel. But they also did keep some of the best qualities of the LS engine, like the O-rings around the intake ports to eliminate any need for gaskets. Also, notice just in front of the intake, LS engines never came with a road draft tube like you would find in the old 283 Chevrolet. But this engine needs to have an old school look, so this one was created, which slots into the custom CNC cut valley cover. And speaking of CNC work, check out the velocity stacks. These aren't pieces of tubing modded to fit the intake. Each has been CNC cut from aluminum stock so that it's all one piece, including the flanges on the base. And just wait until we put on the tops. The linkages to control all 8 butterflies are pretty complex. That will require a little bit of work to properly sort out on the dyno, but the mechanical look is really cool and it'll provide a visual focus point once the engine is complete. Each throttle body, by the way, has an internal diameter of 2 inches 250 thousandths and is 6 inches tall. So as we look past the butterfly in the intake runner, you can see the hole where the injector blows the fuel into the intake path. The shinier part just below that is the CNC portion of the intake runner on the cylinder head. Next up came the billet, well, let's call them valve covers. Like the intake, these are completely custom and sealed to the cylinder heads with unobtrusive O-rings. And they have machined-in standoffs to mount the coil packs. The heights are stair-stepped in order to squeeze in all four along with the necessary wiring and plug wires and be able to hide them under the custom valve covers, which we'll see in a minute. Now the design for the covers is pretty sweet, but like the accessory drive setup, at this point they weren't complete yet. The coil covers aren't necessary to run the engine, however, so it can still get onto the dyno. I'll show you the completed covers in just a bit. Jeff Breault takes a moment to test fit the ram tubes. Like everything else, these are also cut from billet aluminum. Each threads into place, and an O-ring seals the connection and also limits the chance for an annoying rattle. So here's the engine on the dyno. And as you can see, they're running fast XFI 2.0 as engine controls and ignition control there. And it runs up to the intake manifold. This is all of the ignition controls here. Right here we have fuel in. It's controlled by a pressure regulator further down the line. And this is the idle, let's see if we show there. This is the idle air control here. And then ignition is just handled by standard coils mounted up. Granted, it doesn't look like much quite yet, but right now all we care about is getting it properly tuned and making a number. It took a little bit to get everything set up on the dyno. Here, Keith hooks up the dyno's throttle cable to the mechanicals on the intake, and he also spends a few minutes making adjustments so that all 8 butterflies open at the same time and rate. And once that's done, we can put those gorgeous air rams on each stack. And we're ready to go. Jeff makes a few adjustments to the fast, easy EFI 2.0 self-learning software that'll run the whole show. Once they got the engine up and running, there were really no surprises. Despite the custom intake, really this is just a hot rod LS7. Every other component is from an industry-leading manufacturer and has been well tested and trusted. Plus, Keith and Jeff can practically get 600 horsepower out of an LS in their sleep. So, let's see how this one does. Power curve on this build turned out really nice. We hit peaks of 618.6 foot-pounds of torque at 5,100 RPM and an impressive 654.5 horsepower at 6,000. And right now you're probably saying, but wait, they stopped the pull while the power was still climbing. This engine can make more than that. And you'd be right, but honestly, the Roadster this engine is going into is more of an art piece than a track terror. And while it will definitely be driven, it likely will never be pushed to its absolute limits. Still, we estimate if we had continued the pull to 6,800 or so, the power would probably be in the 670 to 680 range. That's definitely pretty healthy. And I've seen too many show cars where the builder has simply plopped in a crate motor with a few sheet metal covers to disguise it. So, I can definitely respect Breault and Devlin's Rod and Custom actually going to the trouble to build a bespoke performance engine specifically for this project. After confirming that the LS ran to their expectations, didn't leak, and would be reliable, Automotive specialists crated it up and shipped it over to Devlin's Rod and Custom so they could transform it into a piece of jewelry worthy of the car. From here on out, I don't have any video. But the guys at Devlin's, as well as car owner Jeff Breault, were kind enough to send over these shots, which I definitely appreciate. With everyone on the team spread out across the country, up until this time, Devlin's had mostly been working with mock-ups. So one of the first things they did was test fit the complete engine and the chassis, and then also with the body to make sure everything would fit. Like the engine, the chassis is a one-of-a-kind creation fabbed up by the Roadster shop. I love the trick cantilever suspension for both the front and the rear, but the way they hid the coilover shocks on the inside of the frame rails up front, where they'd basically be hidden by the engine, is especially trick. Anyhow, the engine was torn way down so it could be dressed up. One issue they apparently did run into was the cast oil pan I had mentioned previously didn't work with either the chassis or the suspension setup. Or maybe it was just the way it looked. I'm not positive. Anyhow, they did swap it out with a rear sump steel pan from Moroso. Remember when I talked about how Johnson's Hot Rod Shop actually 3D printed their custom intake manifold as a proof of concept and to work out the bugs? Here's a shot Johnson sent me where they did the same thing with the custom coil mounts and the valve covers they designed. So here's the CNC cut aluminum valve cover. Notice the cutouts or grooves on both ends. They are here to mate up with these mock straps that look like they're holding the valve cover down. And here you can see how they go together. Wait, here's another shot with the valve cover painted, and you can see how really cool it looks when they go together. Just below each valve cover, Devlin has also fabbed up these very cool plug wire routing sleeves from tubing, which definitely creates a clean look. I don't know if running the plug wires side by side like this created any spark jump issues between the plug wires, but it's hard to deny the look is super sanitary. And the screens in the center probably took a ton of time to do correctly, but they just add even more visual flair. And here in these mock-up shots, you can see that the electric water pump has been replaced with a belt-driven pump. There were no serpentine belt systems back in the World War II era, so everything is run off of a V-belt setup. Then, the super laborious task of painting everything had to begin. I can't imagine the number of hours the guys at Devlin's put in sanding, primering, and primering all over again. We knew from the start that the head bolts would be replaced, but somewhere along the way, the bolts were swapped out for head studs and 12-point nuts, which were actually painted too. Then, most of the other bolts were swapped out for chrome 12-pointers. The final result is like a gray mirror. The quality here is just unbelievable, and I'm not sure if it even shows up well enough in the photos. Check out how they even smoothed and painted the water pump and even the ATI harmonic balancer. After seeing this, I'm going to feel a little bit guilty the next time I hose down a block with a rattle can of VHT black and call it a day. I mean, I've seen body work that's not this nice. The cast portion of the intake manifold was also painted to match, but the throttle bodies are all polished to a mirror shine. And here is how it all came together in the 1934 Chevrolet Roadster. Check out those beautiful exhaust headers, which, you guessed it, are also custom castings. Owner Jeff Breault said this project, from start to finish, took an incredible 7 years. And if you ask me, I certainly think it was worth it. I think I already mentioned that Chevrolet Roadsters are incredibly rare. This 34 is actually a Holden that came out of Australia. It's just one of only 31 built by Holden that year. I'm in love with this car, and I hope you enjoyed some of the behind-the-scenes stories of the build. Thanks again for watching. Please leave us a like and drop a comment if you enjoyed this style of video. And we'll see you next time with more great builds.